It started with a photograph. A creased, slightly faded snapshot slipped out of an old travel journal I hadn't touched in years. I was sitting on my couch, a mug of coffee cooling in my hand, when it fluttered to the floor a silverback gorilla, its dark eyes staring straight through the lens, framed by the misty green chaos of a jungle. My friend Mark had taken it years ago in Uganda, on a trek through Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. He'd come back with wild stories of chest-beating giants and a forest so dense it swallowed you whole. I'd promised myself I'd go someday, but life, work, bills, excuses kept pushing it off. Until that moment. That gorilla's gaze lit something in me. A restless spark I couldn't ignore. I was going. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane. The hum of the engines drowning out my nerves as we descended into Entebbe. Uganda stretched out below, a patchwork of red earth and green hills, shimmering under a late afternoon sun. The real journey began the next morning. A 10-hour drive southwest to Bwindi. The road was a beast, potholes big enough to swallow tires, dust clouds billowing around the Jeep, and stretches where the asphalt gave way to gravel that rattled my bones. My driver, a cheerful guy named Paul, kept me sane with stories of his childhood in a nearby village, pointing out vervet monkeys scampering along the roadside and tea plantations rolling over the hills like emerald waves. By the time we reached the edge of Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and casting long shadows over the lodge where I'd spend the night. It was a simple place, wooden walls, a tin roof, a porch overlooking a valley where mist was already curling up from the trees. I could hear the forest breathing, a chorus of crickets and distant bird calls. Tomorrow, I'd step into it. I barely slept. The anticipation was electric, buzzing in my chest as I lay under a mosquito net, imagining what waited out there. At a.m., I was up, lacing my hiking boots and triple-checking my backpack. Water, snacks, a rain jacket, my camera. I met my guide, Joseph, at the ranger station, a weary man with a broad smile and eyes that crinkled like he'd seen 1,000 treks and still loved everyone. He'd been leading groups into Bwindi for 15 years, he told me, and his calm confidence steadied my jitters. There were 6 of us in the group. Me, an Australian couple named Liz and Tom who wouldn't stop talking about their outback adventures, a quiet German photographer called Hans with a lens the size of my arm, and 2 American college students, Priya and Jake, who seemed as nervous as I was. Joseph gathered us in a circle, his voice low and firm. "We're tracking the Mubari family today," he said. "The first group habituated here, back in '93. Could take 2 hours, could take 7. Stay close. Listen to me. And when we find them, no flash, no sudden moves. Keep 7 meters back."
I nodded, my heart thumping. 7 meters from a gorilla. This was real. We set off at dawn, the forest swallowing us whole. The air was cool and damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. The trail, if you could call it, that was a narrow thread of mud winding through a wall of green. Trees towered overhead, their canopies blotting out the sky, while vines dangled like curtains and roots twisted underfoot like traps. My boots sank into the muck with every step, and within 20 minutes, sweat was trickling down my back despite the chill. Joseph led the way, machete in hand, hacking through thorny undergrowth when the path disappeared. Behind me, Liz chattered about a kangaroo she'd once seen, but her voice faded as the forest's sounds took over: chirps, rustles, the occasional snap of a branch. I slipped crossing a stream, my foot plunging into icy water, and Priya grabbed my arm to steady me. "You good?" she asked, grinning. I laughed, shaking off the cold. "Yeah, just breaking in the boots." An hour in, Joseph stopped, crouching 2-point at a pile of fresh dung. "Gorillas," he whispered, his eyes scanning the trees. "Not far now." My pulse quickened. He showed us a broken bamboo shoot, the jagged edge still wet with sap, another sign. The forest felt alive, every shadow hiding a secret. We climbed a steep slope, my calves burning as I gripped roots to haul myself up. Tom slipped behind me, cursing as he slid back a foot, and Jake helped him up, the group tightening into a quiet, determined unit. The higher we went, the thicker the mist, curling around us like smoke. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but Joseph moved with certainty, following tracks I couldn't even spot. Then a sound, a low, guttural grunt, faint but unmistakable. I froze. Joseph turned his finger to his lips and motioned us forward. "They're close," he breathed. The first gorilla I saw was a juvenile, maybe 4 years old, swinging down from a low branch with the grace of a gymnast. It landed with a thud, tumbling into a roll before popping up to stare at us, its dark eyes wide with curiosity. My breath caught. The forest parted like a curtain, and there they were, the Mubari family. A mother sat cradling an infant, its tiny hands clutching her fur. 2 youngsters wrestled nearby, grunting and tumbling over each other in a pile of leaves. And then him, Ruhandeza, the silverback. He stepped into view, a mountain of muscle and presence, his silver-streaked back glinting in a shaft of light that pierced the canopy. He was massive, 400 pounds, Joseph had said, but it wasn't just his size. It was the way he moved, deliberate and unhurried, like he owned every inch of this forest. He turned his head, locking eyes with me, and I felt small, insignificant, but not afraid. There was a quiet power in that gaze, a knowing I couldn't explain.
We dropped to a crouch, 7 meters back, as Joseph had instructed. My camera hung forgotten around my neck. I couldn't look away long enough to lift it. Ruhandeza settled onto a patch of moss, tearing into a bamboo shoot with hands that could have crushed my skull. The sound of its snapping filled the air, mingling with the soft coos of the infant and the rustle of leaves as the juveniles played. Hans clicked his camera, the shudder a faint whisper, and Liz gripped Tom's arm, her chatter replaced by a hushed "oh my god." The mother gorilla glanced at us, her expression calm, almost bored, as she nursed her baby. I could smell them, musky, earthy, alive. Time slowed, the hour we were allowed stretching into something eternal. Then Ruhandeza stood, towering over us, and beat his chest, 2 thunderous thumps that echoed through the trees. My heart leapt into my throat, but Joseph's hand on my shoulder steadied me. "He's saying hello," he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. I exhaled, grinning like an idiot. Too soon, Joseph tapped his watch. Our hour was up. We backed away slowly, the gorillas fading into the green as if they'd never been there. The trek back was a blur. Rain started falling, turning the trail into a river of mud. I slipped again, landing hard on my backside, and laughed as Priya pulled me up, my pants soaked through. The group was quieter now, each of us lost in what we'd seen. My legs ached, my boots squelched, but I didn't care. Back at the lodge, we peeled off wet gear and gathered around a table, sharing roasted plantains and a pot of goat stew. Joseph joined us, his eyes twinkling as he told us about his first trek as a young guide, how he'd frozen when a silverback charged, only to realize it was a bluff. "They teach you who's boss," he said, and we all laughed, the warmth of the food and the memory binding us together. That night, I sat on the lodge porch, the forest a dark silhouette against a sky pricked with stars. Mist drifted up from the valley, carrying the faint hoot of an owl. I thought about Ruhandeza, about the way he'd looked at me not as a threat, not as a friend, but as something fleeting, a visitor in his world. I thought about how these gorillas, so close to us in blood, 98 of our DNA, I'd read had carved out a life here in a forest older than human memory. I thought about the rangers and guides like Joseph, fighting to keep them safe, growing their numbers from a desperate 650 to over 1,000. It hit me then, sitting there with mud still caked on my boots. This wasn't just an adventure, it was a glimpse into something bigger, a thread connecting me to the wild, to the past, to something worth protecting. The next morning, I'd leave Bwindi, the jeep rattling me back to Entebbe and the world of concrete and screens. But that moment on the porch stayed with me, the sound of the forest, the weight of Ruhandeza's stare, the ache in my legs that felt like a badge.